A question we often get from clients is, do I pay off the mortgage in retirement or right before I retire or not? A lot of people are really striving to get the mortgage out of the way completely. But a lot of people are also asking, does this make sense? What's the best for my dough? And that's what we want to talk about. So I've got a case study that we can look at. We can really figure that out. And what we've been seeing with clients really just depends on their specific situation. You know, a lot has changed here recently. And if you've got a 3% mortgage rate, maybe you're considering keeping your investments and just allowing them to pay for your mortgage. But the people who are retiring, maybe relocating, and either they've sold a house and downsized now and they're saying, hey, do I put this money in the bank and let it grow and then just take a mortgage? Or what do I do? Well, with a 7% interest rate, it's kind of hard to really swallow that. So let's take a look here. I've got retired Roger and Mrs. Retired Roger. And what we've built out, they've got $1.45 million in net worth. They've got a $450,000 mortgage with a 7% interest rate that they just took out, and they're going to pay it off in 2025. So what it comes to here, though, they've got a $5,000 monthly expense. As far as their investments go, they're getting 7.8% average return, though, you know, again, that's going to vary significantly depending on the markets. 74% stocks, 20%, 26% bonds. And so if you're looking here, they got an 82% probability of success. And what they would leave as a legacy is about $823,000. So, you know, looking at this plan, it looks great, right? And it's like, hey, you know what? They're going to make it. Everything's good. If you're sitting there wondering, well, 82% probability of success, wow, that kind of concerns me. We talk about the Monte Carlo analysis and how that's 1,000 scenarios. We like to see clients in the 80 to 90% probability of success there because that's really a sweet spot. This is a little bit more of a conservative look than anything people are using when it comes to what's called a cash flow analysis. So if you're doing just cash flow, it's going to look a lot different. But what happens if the market fell 20%? Well, if we're taking a look here, a 20% market drop immediately would drop their success to 31.2%. I do not like to see that. But, you know, you can always make a lot of changes in the plan. But what we've got to really figure here is, you know, what's going to be the best case here for retired Roger and Mrs. Retired Roger. And so let's go over here and take a look. And now let's say, hey, you know what? Let's not do an early payoff, and let's see how that's going to affect the plan. And now, so if we're looking here at the Monte Carlo analysis on this scenario, what we can see once it loads up here is that your probability of success actually drops down, but you potentially have a lot more money for legacy planning. So what you've got to think through when it comes to your specific scenario, when it comes to the mortgage is, well, do I want to have more financial freedom and just less stress? Or do I want to leave more of a legacy? In this scenario, if this is the case, then maybe you're going to continue to consider paying on this mortgage. And now we could also look at the stress test in this scenario. And I kind of cheated and looked at it a little bit before. So I know that the scenario here is actually better for the stress test if the market were to fall 20%, but you still have a 44.2%. So this would be where we would have to have a conversation with retired Roger and Mrs. Retired Roger and maybe say, hey, you know what? When you're in the retirement years, you know, you were planning on doing the trip to Europe and seeing all of Europe next year. Well, maybe next year we don't do that scenario. Maybe we're going to wait. And really what it's looking at is a market drop immediately of 20% when you're getting ready to pay off your mortgage. So maybe you would carry the mortgage for just a little while, let everything recover, and then look to make the adjustments and pay off the mortgage if that's what you choose to do. But let's kind of think through this thing here. So you've got a few different pros and cons that we're really thinking through. We talked about looking at their investments. And part of this is going to determine what people are going to do depending on what their interest rate is. A lot of people, look at this and say, hey, I've got a 3% mortgage. And if you have a 3% mortgage and you're hoping to get, 6 or 7% on average in your retirement years on your money, well, then maybe it doesn't make sense for you to pay off that mortgage. On the other side of things, with the higher interest rates right now, things have really changed. And a lot of people are saying, maybe it does make sense just to go ahead and pay off this mortgage. I always suggest you take it, run it through a financial plan, figure out what's going to be best for you. There's tons of free tools, or here at Jazz Wealth, we use Nest Egg with our clients. Also, you've got to look at the mortgage tax deductions. Does that something that really sits well with you? Is that something that you get excited about? Personally, I don't. It's nothing against CPAs, but oftentimes CPAs like to pitch that if it's like, well, hey, I don't think you should pay off your mortgage right this second because you get a tax deduction. Well, In most scenarios, you're probably not going to get a tax deduction because right now we have a really high standard deduction in 2024 for taxes. But if for some reason you find yourself being very charitable, giving away a lot of money and having a mortgage still, and you can deduct the taxes or the interest on your mortgage, here's what we have to think through. Well, if you have a $10,000 interest payment that you've made to the bank for your mortgage, that's one thing. You've got $10,000 here. Well, if you have a 32% tax bracket, that means that you saved $3,200 by being able to deduct the $10,000 mortgage interest. But would you rather have $3,200 in savings or $10,000 and only pay $3,200 in taxes? So that's what you have to think through. That's just a little scenario, and it's nothing against the CPAs out there, but it's something that really you've got to figure out what's going to work best for me in this situation. And now we talked about the market downturns and the risks there that come into play. But then what we haven't talked about is what if you did just pay off the mortgage? At least you have an asset that's sitting there that it's not always advisable to borrow against. But worst case scenario, potentially there's a bad market crash. Interest rates are super low. Maybe you can borrow a little bit against your house and then let your assets recover a little bit to get you to where you need to be. There's a lot of different things here that we could play around with when it comes to that. But for each person, it will depend. But I want to know in the comments here, let me know what your thoughts are. Would you rather have a mortgage paid off in retirement? Or you're like, hey, you know what? I've got a low interest rate. I'm going to keep this thing rolling.